Hotel Transylvania is a film series produced by Sony Animation Pictures, which has been going on for, a decade now. I've never really given it a shot, but I have recently watched the first film with my roommate Sock, and decided to give the whole quadrilogy a spin shortly thereafter. I'm surprised by exactly how much I have to say about it, and how much it does right, particularly given its juvenile approach to entertainment and storytelling. Let's dig in. Particularly noticeable in the first film is that, it has what's just plain missing in most high-budget 3D animation. The characters in Hotel Transylvania squash, stretch, and deform. They're rarely on model, which allows for a variety of creative expressions, dynamic poses, and so much more body language. It's still very visibly CG animation, but it has the silhouette and soul of traditional 2D animation. It's impressive, it looks really good, and I never get tired of it. The second most noticeable aspect of the film is that it's entirely juvenile, but it's juvenile on purpose. That's its identity. It primarily cares about catering to young children. There are lots of screaming characters who scream for no particular reason, mile-a-minute slapstick gags, and of course, funny monsters. None of that is inherently bad though, especially when it's carried out with such deliberate flair. It's hard not to be entertained, I think, but maybe I just have a soft spot for old school cartoon antics. And last but not least, they wrote actual characters? Don't get me wrong, everyone on display here is a character in the goofiest, most extra way imaginable, but that doesn't equate with a lack of heart. I was particularly impressed with how they handled Dracula. He created Hotel Transylvania as a hidden refuge for monsters, so they could escape the prejudice of the outside world and live among their own kind. He's a bit of a control freak. Everything about his hotel has to be just so, and he has to keep the other monsters and his daughter safe at all costs. He wants all of their trust, but only so he can manipulate that trust to keep them safe. Speaking of his daughter, Mavis, she's the secondary protagonist. She spent 118 years languishing under her father's oppressive gaze, and she wants to see the world for herself, maybe make some human friends. Her chance at freedom at last appears with Johnny, a normal human 21-year-old who just stumbles into Hotel Transylvania by chance. With his wacky personality and amiable, goofy nature, he turns things upside down. Mavis learns to love and express her individuality, Dracula learns that loving your family means giving them their freedom, and Johnny, he's basically perfect how he is, more or less. He wins everyone over, including Dracula, but we at least see how he does it. He's a good guy. It's actually pretty solid stuff, and the scenes of exposition are either handled with humor, appropriate gravitas, or both. It's not all moonbeams and spider silk, though. Some of the conflicts are resolved in an overconvenient fashion. The film subscribes to that whole toxic one true love propaganda, and a lot of the emotional impact is lost by how long certain scenes drag, but it's still an interesting cartoon with spectacular animation. The second film starts with Johnny and Mavis's marriage, and news of Mavis's pregnancy. Drac is, of course, overjoyed as a stereotypical loving dad would be. It's cute, though it's not all good news exactly. Dracula is obsessed with the idea that his grandson, Dennis, will be a vampire, so the vampire bloodline will carry on. This contrasts strongly with Mavis's general concerns about monsters being unsafe for Dennis. It raises interesting cultural questions. Are monsters inherently dangerous? Is it necessary for Dennis to grow up around humans to have a healthy, well-adjusted life? The conflict here is pretty good. Johnny loves his new life in Monsterland, but Mavis wants to leave for Dennis's sake. So Dracula helps Johnny convince Mavis to stay for entirely selfish reasons. Everyone has their own stake in this, and their own perfectly legitimate reasons, however underhanded their behaviors might ultimately be. There are plenty of subtexts and subplots, too. For example, there are a lot of appreciable themes about how the world is changed now from when Dracula was younger. He tries to show Dennis how scary and cool monsters can be, but they're not scary or cool the same way anymore. Monsters are more socially accepted now because it's a softer, gentler world, and monsters themselves are softer and gentler. An inability to recognize this almost leads Dracula to lose Dennis and his daughter Mavis forever. Being a monster doesn't mean actually being a monster. Dracula's unhealthy ideas about monster kind ultimately come from his own father, who probably got the same ideas from his father, and the message here is clear. It's up to each generation to pass down a softer punch than the last, to ensure we become kinder over time, not more cruel. Mavis gets her own character development where she learns that normal isn't necessarily the same thing as healthy when she goes to visit Johnny's parents in Encino, California. Her story is much faster and could have used a few more scenes to really flesh out her journey, but otherwise it's fairly sensible and we can see how she naturally arrives at the conclusion she does based on her experiences. The animation here is just as expressive as the first film, if not more so, and there were plenty of scenes that made me laugh just by virtue of their fluidity and outrageous facial expressions. In addition, this sequel uses some elements of awkward humor, and does them surprisingly well, given that particular genre of comedy went untouched in the prior film. So what about the flaws? Well, this film has villains, and it really didn't need them. The conflict doesn't necessitate any bad guys to beat up for the same reason the first film didn't. It's a conflict of culture and of values. It doesn't need resolved with violence, but the end of the film is absolutely stuffed full of over-the-top cartoony fight scenes anyway, using entirely one-note bad guy characters. Johnny also doesn't get any resolution for his own character struggles, which seems like a huge oversight. Anything else is relatively minor in comparison to those two aspects. It's still a story about cultural marriage and a story about love, and it's got some of the most likable characters in animated media. It's cute and fun and actually thoughtful when it wants to be. The third film begins with an extremely stylish cold opening, showing us the kind of prejudice and fear that monsterkind actually dealt with. The Helsings, a family of vampire hunters. They want monsters dead solely for the fact that they are monsters. It's not a terribly nuanced portrayal of conflicting cultures or racism and genocide, but hey, it's more than the last two films gave us for context, and it makes this film's inevitable supervillain feel more warranted. This film is actually all about that, now that I think about it. It recontextualizes things. It recontextualizes Johnny and Mavis's wedding, giving it more depth than it ever had previously and making it more heartfelt. It provides new, intelligent, thoughtful callbacks to previous characterization and ideas, adding more to chew on and more to appreciate. Most importantly, it recontextualizes love. The previous two films in the series were nigh obsessed with the idea of one true love. The unhealthy, backwards notion that love only happens once, and when it does happen, you'll know, because you'll zing with someone. It's an eye-rolling oversimplification of romance, it's obnoxious, but at least it didn't get in the way of the characters and themes too heavily. But here's the thing. This third entry completely subverts that once ironclad rule, doing so with grace and charm. In the first film, we learned that Dracula lost his wife. His one true love perished, and so you'd figure he's just out of luck, right? After all, by the series' logic, true love only happens once. But he's really lonely, and in Hotel Transylvania 3, he zings a second time. Something that was thought to be absolutely impossible, or at the very least unconscionable, by his family's cultural traditions. And the ultimate irony, of course, is that his new love is a Helsing. She literally wants to kill him. Star-crossed lovers, if there ever were a pair. The storyline is dedicated to showing us, one more time, a marriage of cultures, but now in a bigger, flashier, and more complex way than ever before. We learn so much more about these characters, their beliefs, their lives, and see them collide in ways that reveal hidden depth to the universe and its morality that was previously glossed over. There's so much to enjoy here. There's the way Dracula wins his love's heart fair and square by being a wholesome and kind person. There's the film's dedication to showing genuine progress and change rather than rehashing old ideas. It has a lot to say about the importance of family and the warmth and light it brings to people's lives. The character dynamics are so entertaining. These people genuinely love each other, and you can tell just by watching them in action. It's also gorgeously animated, full of memorable set pieces, more creative slapstick than ever, and a spectacularly over-the-top conclusion. Hotel Transylvania has managed, through these 3 films, to create some of the most consistent and warm-hearted characters in animated fiction. It's still a juvenile, goofy affair, primarily concerned with entertaining children using vibrant colors and goofy faces, but that doesn't mean it's also not a darn good story. It's time to talk very briefly about the 4th film now. God, there's a 4th? Yeah, there's a 4th one. Okay, let's get this over with. In Hotel Transylvania 4, Dracula has to relearn a bunch of garbage he already learned in the first 3 films for some reason. Dracula hates Johnny again, God knows why. We already dealt with this conflict in the first movie, but now he thinks Johnny's insufferable once more, or else there would be no conflict. Just throw all that character development and all those tender moments from the previous films out the window. Whoosh, there they go. They also, blatantly retcon a bunch of other stuff, like how freezing works. In the first 2 films, Dracula could visibly freeze other vampires, and does so at plot-critical moments. But in this one, they just say freezing never worked on vampires. Nope, never happened. Don't be silly. You've just remembered wrong. That's all. That's kind of this film's whole shtick, really. The first 3 entries in this series were all about progression, change, and taught us new things about the characters. This 4th film is about regression. Everyone loses depth just so there's a reason to fill 90 minutes of screen time. It's lazy, bothersome, and I couldn't force myself to finish it. They did a bad job. The animation's still spectacular, though. Howdy, it's the end of the video, and happy Halloween, nerds. This is normally where I'd put the whole patron video ad outro thing, but it's Halloween, so I'm gonna use that as an excuse not to do that and just read you the list of patrons. Here we go. Ipompus, Anonymous, Jay, Marth Sinclair, The Roses, Sam Anderson, Some Call Me Anto, Waposa, Mint Horse, Mike Hansen, Kay Storkson, and Zuzu. As always, thank you all so much for your time and thoughts. It really means a lot, and I'll talk to you in the next video.